Let's talk about Cinemax After Dark, shall we? If you're unawares, and I'm not sure when they started and I'm not sure when it ended, but the time I became informed about Cinemax After Dark was sometime in the early-ish 90s, late 80s, early 90s. My family had subscribed to HBO, which we loved and I loved, but HBO was moving away from just showing movies. HBO always had a lot of other things going on, but in the days before you had HBO 1, 2, 3 and all kinds of categories, they were cramming more and more stuff onto HBO that wasn't movies. And if you were like me and you really were hungry to watch movies, the opportunity to see those was getting fewer and farther between with all the TV shows and sports and comedy and kids programming and everything else. And I found out about Cinemax, which was just movies all the time. So I convinced my parents to switch over to Cinemax. And one of the bonus features of Cinemax was on Friday and or Saturday nights, after a certain hour, they had what they called Cinemax After Dark. And it was softcore nudie movies. It was erotic thrillers. It was stuff like that. European sex comedy, stuff like that. Stuff that any high school hetero male boy would just be thrilled to have piped into their bedroom in those days before the internet. Let's just say that. So having said that, MVD has a new line of titles, double features, called SkinMax Double Features. And we're talking about one of those, or two of those, today. This is the SkinMax double feature of Galaxy Girls and Petticoat Planet. These are two titles I'd heard of. The box covers were familiar to me from the video store days. I never saw them back then. And this is a DVD. It's a very simple DVD. This takes you right back to that time. These don't look any better than they did back then. I don't even know what the materials would be for these. These probably were Video Masters, were all that was done. In this era, a lot of time when things were just going to be heading to video or cable, they would be shot on film, but then all that film would be transferred to video and they would just edit it on video, output to video, and that was the master, because why would they ever think something higher resolution than video would come along? And much like the early exploitation films, why would they ever think there'd be a use or need or want for these a couple of years down the road? So this is a standard definition DVD. The films are 4:3. There's not much in the way of special features. I will tell you what there is. These have English subtitles. And let's just jump in, shall we? Galaxy Girls from 1995, directed by Scott Harris, which may or may not be a pseudonym for somebody who's better known. Stars Gail, Thackray, Monique Parent, and cameos. The best part for me, cameos by directors Fred Olen Ray and Jim Wynorski, who made a lot of movies like this and a lot of exploitation, horror, comedy, all kinds of stuff. Still working, both guys still working to this very day. Presented in 4:3, 95 minutes long. And basically, it's three saucy ladies, three babes, three females, three young ladies take a vacation in the mountains where they come across a downed UFO whose crew is not friendly. That's basically all there is to it. There's really very little to the stories here. So it's a lot of dialogue, a lot of lovely ladies out in buff studs out in the woods, having chats, occasionally taking a shower or taking a swim or something like that. Not as much nudity as you would think in this movie. There's softcore sex scenes that really play like, saucy music videos, basically. And it's really not very good, technically. But this is one of those things where I have no love for the 90s. I lived through it. It was fine. There was great stuff. There was not so great stuff. But I don't look back on it fondly. I really don't like the aesthetic of most 90s stuff. So I'm not the audience this is really intended for. If you're a bit younger than me and you love the look of the 90s and love it's like 70s stuff with me. With me, 70s stuff was the era that I kind of sort of lived through but just missed. Almost anything from that era can be terrible. If these exact same scripts, if somehow these films were just transplanted 20 years earlier, I probably would be all over them just for how they looked and what the music was like and all that. But because of how it is, they're not for me. So really the highlight is Fred Olen Ray and Jim Wynorski playing these two roadside construction workers who speak with a very haughty Thurston Howell kind of accent, who pretend to be lecherous lunkheads when the ladies pull up and ask for directions and then go back to being haughty, high-minded Thurston Howell kind of guys. Just a fun cameo. It's just really, it's a softcore sci-fi comedy, and it's not as saucy as you would think, and it looks exactly like it did back then. So if you do have nostalgia for the period of time, this is going to look exactly like it did on TV. Maybe a little sharper depending on how your cable reception was, but certainly these are not HD. They just look like they used to back then. A little bit soft, but that might just be the soft focus that these films often use to try to make them a little hazy and a little softcore, basically. The other film on this is Petticoat Planet from 1996, directed by Dave DeCoteau, who's working under the name Ellen Cabot for this film. Stars Elizabeth Kaitan, Troy Vincent, Lesli Kay, and Betsy Lynn George. Some of those faces you might recognize from other films like this. One of those people, forgive me, I don't know. I know was in some other things, like one of the Friday the 13th movies around. Might have been Jason Takes Manhattan, actually. Again, 4:3. Looks exactly like it did back then. It's so it looks, I think it's a, let's say slightly soft image, fog filter, that kind of thing. And it's basically, it's about this planet that's like the Old West, and it's all females. They know what men are, but you don't see any men there. So it's a female sheriff and female barkeep and female outlaws, and it just looks like somebody found an Old West set or rented an Old West set in Old West costumes and put on an all-female Old West thing until the spaceship, a spaceship crash lands, and it's got a man on it. It's got a buff dude on it who is not displeased to be the only man on a planet full of women who are like, let's see what this whole intercourse thing is all about. So his name is Colonel Steve Rogers, which I thought was a nice touch. This is, post Linda Carter Wonder Woman, pre Gal Gadot Wonder Woman by a decade or two. So it's an amusing comic book reference. He makes a ton of pop culture references, which I found like super annoying. Like he's just dropping references to music and movies and TV shows that nobody around him gets, and it's just, it all falls flat for me. So it's basically a lot of softcore running. It often plays like a music video with nudity in it. A bit more salacious than the first film was, but still just really not explicit, so no fear there, I guess. Light comedy that's not very funny, and it's just not very good. Kind of a snoozer, actually. And none of these are very long. This is 95 minutes, but I don't know. Maybe I'm jaded. It's partly that I don't care about this era. If this was, again, made 20, 30 more years in the past, I would be more interested in the look of it. It's, Russ Meyer's Wild Gals of the Naked West, to me, is a lot more entertaining than this film was, and that arguably has even less story than this film does. Really probably best for people with nostalgia for the era or like 90s cheese. If you like 90s cheese, I would highly recommend this disc. If you're like me and you don't, there's probably not a lot there for you, unless you're a fan of any of the performers, not all of which get as naked as you would like them to, just not to be too crude and lascivious, but that's what these movies were made for. Extras are our trailers for a ton of films like this. I believe these are all either other SkinMax double features that MVD is putting out or maybe putting out, but they're all of the same era and vibe as these. So you get trailers for Different Strokes, not the TV show, Forbidden Passions, Galaxy Girls, Lurid Tales of the Castle Queen, Midnight Temptations 2, Petticoat Planet, Strip Show, Target of Seduction, and Ultimate Taboo. All of them, to me, look as good or bad as the two features on this film, depending on your mindset. So, again, this is one of those things where I say I didn't like these movies, but I'm glad that they're available for people who do like them. From MVD is a double feature, SkinMax double feature of Petticoat Planet and Galaxy Girls.